what is your gut reaction? Is this surprising at all? And what does this really mean, would you say, for the political state of Israel right now?
Well, it's a dark day. I have to say loudly and clearly, there have been not only demonstrations in front of the Knesset, people sleeping out just a few blocks from where the vote took place. And this is one of the most divisive and I think deeply affecting bills that have passed. It really weakens the Supreme Court. It weakens the ability of the Supreme Court to comment on bills that or policies that the government will pass. The nominations of individuals will be not subject to the Supreme Court. And Israel has really only two real branches of government. The legislative and the executive are really one, and the Supreme Court. So this is after 8 months of grueling and difficult protests, week after week by the opponents. And there was a declaration of victory, but to be truthful, this is a day that there is no victory. This will be harmful to Israel's democracy. The society is divided, deeply so. And it was clear that when President Herzog was here in the U.S., he was articulating the ability to compromise, to bring somehow a consensus when you make such a dramatic change in Israel's core of democracy. And that did not take place. The rejection on the part of the coalition to all attempts to make a compromise were stunning. And there is the possibility that the Supreme Court can actually review this government decision and possibly overrule it. It's a very unprecedented moment for Israel's democracy. And for those of us who care and love Israel, it's a deeply, deeply concerning moment.
And you know, we're seeing some live photos outside the Knesset. There's a lot of protesters out there, and we seem that this is going to go on for quite some time. So if you would talk about what happens now inside the country. Over the weekend, a lot of the pilots said that they would not fly for the military. A lot of government workers said they will not do their job, all those who are opposed to it. So now what happens within the country at this point before we know what happens going forward?
Well, there is no sense that this is a decision that is going to be accepted and supported. As you rightfully say, the most key members of the Israel Reserve Forces, and these are people who fly the most advanced planes in Israel's Air Force, have said they will not volunteer for their reserve duty. The people in high tech, in academia, in medicine, it's across the entire sectors of the Israeli population and economy. And so this decision will not be accepted. And the protest that you see outside is going to continue. People are gearing up for whatever challenges they can make to this decision, because this decision is dramatic and it's harmful. And it really affects not a decision, it affects the structures of Israel's democracy. To weaken the Supreme Court is to weaken the balance of power and to do something that is frankly unprecedented in Israeli democracy. So there will not be a quiet resignation and say, well, we lost, time to get back to work. There will be strikes, there'll be protests, there'll be efforts in the Supreme Court and in all sectors because the stakes are just that high.
Rabbi, you say that this is, violating the balance of power here. The opposition intends to appeal to the Supreme Court to determine if the legislation is legal. But isn't that what this is all about, to weaken the Supreme Court? I mean, what are the chances this could be overturned?
Well, this is about weakening the Supreme Court, but until it takes, effect, the Supreme Court still has the ability to review it if they accept it. They have not yet commented. And it is one of those things that, frankly, will be a test of Israel's democracy. And, the people who have been initiating these changes, they're not going to rest. They have a whole host of things. This is, in their mind, the first of many changes that they want to make to further weaken the judiciary. The rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, these are hallmarks of a democracy. Israel has been, and we must keep it, a democracy. But frankly, this is we're unable to even say what are the short-term and long-term effects of this decision. But I can tell you that the 64 votes in favor, all of the opposition got up and walked out of the vote. They did not want to be in the Knesset when this historic vote was taken. And they're not going to simply fall into line because the stakes, as I said a moment ago, are simply too high. And I think we don't know what the outpouring into the streets is going to be. The people, to have 29 weeks in a row of hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting this judiciary coup is simply something that's never happened. And to sustain that kind of opposition for that long indicates that people feel it's absolutely essential that this continue to be opposed. In a real democracy, yes, there are votes, some win, some lose, but this feels different, and we're not going to be able to predict exactly what will happen, not only later today, but tomorrow and next week. But it is a very challenging moment for those of us who love Israel. I was just with President Herzog. I was just in Israel last week, and I was at protests. And this is just something that either gives you a sense that the democracy is alive, look at the protests that are possible, or it tells you that some very, very deep, irreparable harm has been caused by this first vote.
And already they're calling this the most extreme shakeup to the judiciary since Israel's founding in 1948. That's the moment that we're in. Before we go, I know it's not an easy question, but the reason that the U.S. and Israel have such a strong relationship is Israel is a democracy, the only one in that part of the world. So if it today became less of a democracy, which arguably it has, what does that mean? What should it mean, do you think, for U.S. support of Israel going forward?
Well, let's be honest. There have been threats to the democracy that the United States is proud to be a part of.
Absolutely.
And there are threats to democracy around the world. I think it's too soon and it's inappropriate to say this literally should suggest some rethinking of the U.S. policy to Israel. President Biden has been clear. He was clear as of last night that this vote should not be taken, that compromise and large consensus should be worked through. But it's a moment where those who care about Israel, and I say President Biden and members of the U.S. Congress, when I was in the Congress last week to the joint session, Democrats and Republicans stood, not for any particular policy, but to say that the bonds were unbreakable. They stood to say that the state of Israel is a critical ally of the United States. And that kind of bond can't break with a moment like this, but it's not exactly clear what the shifts would be in policy. But to say that it's unbreakable has to actually be tested in a moment like this. I pray it will be an unbreakable bond that our countries have, but it's not clear exactly what the next move is from the Biden administration or from the U.S. Congress. But I do believe deeply that Israel's mission, its purpose, and its very reality are occasions for wonder and resilience and support. But we don't know exactly what form it will take. But I pray it will remain strong, but quite different after today's vote.
Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be right back.